Hello, my name is Missy Morgan, and I'm the marketing director at Doesnt Consulting. I'm really happy to be with you here today. Um, our experience at Doesnt Consulting, we have recruiters that have been recruiting pathologists and lab executives for more than 30 years. And I can tell you this, the best part of our job is when our clients find a job candidate and it's an awesome candidate, and then the deal actually goes through. It's really satisfying to know that when there's a job opening, there's the right person, it's a good fit, and all ends well. But how do we get there? I know that we could say that job interviews can be really stressful for a lot of people. It's not something that we do every day. So, of course, it's going to be a little kind of like riding a bike. You just have to hop back on and get the practice. So I'm going to provide you today with some key elements for your future success so that job interviews are something that can be more of a feather in your cap than something that makes you feel stressed out. So with that being said, more often than not, I would say that we probably feel more like the guy on the left. When somebody asks us, hey, how did the job interview go? And you say, they said they'd call me. And then you realize you're kind of rethinking everything and maybe recognizing it didn't go as well as you hoped it was, or even, I'm not really sure how it went. And you just feel kind of stressed because you really want the job. Sometimes people feel like Leonardo over there, skipping away from it and feeling really good, like, oh, that was a really great job interview. But then what if Leonardo didn't read the room right? So what's going to happen today is whether you are the interviewer or the interviewee, I think we can all recognize that interviewing is not intuitive, right? It's not something that just kind of comes to you and you know how to do it. But I can tell you as somebody who works at a recruiting firm, just like Doesnt Consulting, it's definitely possible to walk away feeling like Leonardo and knowing that things actually went as well as you thought they did. So my question for you is, are you really ready? Are you really ready for your job interview, whether you're the one who's interviewing someone for a position or you're the one who really wants the position? Employers, are you ready? Now, if you have a really good candidate, they want to know if you are ready for them, right? So let's do this. We're going to walk through establishing an interview objective. And yes, you actually do need one. It's not as complicated as it sounds. And then we need to prepare accordingly. If you have an objective, you prepare to that objective. And then at the end of the day, execution, once you get into that job interview, it's really just going through the things that you already said you want to do and you observe. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to today, I wanted to share this with you too. I'm going to share some horror stories. I'm going to share some good humor. Hopefully, we can have a lot of fun while we're doing this. And then I really want us to establish some new priorities for when we're conducting an interview. So for your first priority today is we're going to talk about your objective. And most people, when they go into an interview, you're not odd if you don't have an objective, but it is really helpful and important if you do. So we're going to talk about how to do that. And we're going to start here first with employers. Now, if you are someone who is a job candidate and you're going to be interviewing, stay tuned. I've got something for you towards the end of this presentation, but I think it might benefit you to hear what employers need to do to prepare for you. This can also help you determine if the employer is a good fit for you. So don't tune out. Stick with me. So what is your interview objective? Let's talk about what that means. And I would say at this point, it's probably more helpful for me to say it doesn't have to end like this, right? Where sometimes you have someone that you really want to have, you really want to hire them. They're an excellent job candidate. And somehow after all of it, they say, hey, don't worry about it. I'll be in touch with you. Just stay tuned. I'll connect with you. And you're feeling like, oh man, I really want this person. I want to hire this person. At the end of the day, yes, you have steep competition. There are currently more jobs than pathologists to fill them, but there really is a way to be the employer who gets all of the talent. So we're going to talk about that. We don't want you to be that guy. We don't want you to experience what that guy is experiencing. So a lot of times, and I don't know why this ends up being our default as human beings, but a lot of times what happens is that we have an unspoken objective. If you're not creating your own objective, you actually have an unspoken objective. And a lot of people aren't aware of that, but it's actually quite true. And it tends to be that the default objective for job interviews, if you're the employer interviewing job candidates, is let's create a really stressful environment during this interview and see if they're up to snuff. We really want someone who can, perform under pressure. Now, I'm here to tell you, with all of the years of experience that we have, and I know you all know Rich Cornell. He's been around for more than 30 years in the industry. There's one thing that Rich says all the time is that stress kills deals. Whether it's the employer is feeling too much stress or absolutely the job candidate, stress is not a helpful thing to create during a job interview. So that kind of objective is actually a no-go. It might even just be something unspoken you don't even know that you're doing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why. When you think about job interviews, everybody in this room has gone on a job interview, and we're all really pretty much preparing just for the worst. Let me have all my answers down pat so that I can show up cool as a cucumber to show these people that I can really perform under pressure. But then really at the end of the day, don't we just kind of look like this little kitty cat? When we're working under pressure, we're not at our best. And the biggest stressor for candidates is when the employer puts slide test on the agenda, right? So that's something that actually creates a stressful situation for the job candidate. And what I really want to say here is we've all been there, right? We've all been this guy. I found this on Twitter and I thought it would be appropriate. During a PhD interview, this person memorized all of their answers ahead of time, right? Just like I was saying. Totally prepared, ready to go, had all the answers down pat so they could just go in there feeling really confident. But then they asked him a question, hey, do you go by Matt or Matthew? And because that was something that they weren't prepared to answer, that was the one thing they hadn't really thought about. They kind of searched the brain, and this person said, math is fine. Goodness, we all have a story like that. And so I think it helps to kind of put on your empathetic hat and say, how can I make this person feel comfortable so I can get to know who they really are and not just the person they're presenting because they know they're under pressure. High expectations plus a vigorous process, like a vigorous interviewing process that's where you're really trying to put high pressure into the situation, really just ends up being that you have very stressed out candidates. You are not going to get the best out of someone if their stress is high. We are, as human beings, are not created to perform really well under pressure over the long term. So I don't know where we got that idea for job interviews, but we need to kind of snap out of that. Now, I also want to add that I mentioned a second ago, there are more jobs today than candidates for you. Everyone in healthcare is actually burned out, and there's research that shows this. No, this is a phenomenon. It's happening. And because of that burnout, people are actually leaving their healthcare jobs and switching careers because of stress. You can see the numbers for yourself. This is the Doximity Physician Compensation Report, where they were actually asking physicians questions beyond just compensation because of what's happening in healthcare right now. In addition, we have the highest number of recorded pathology-related jobs than we have in the past 20 years. Now, back in August, I went ahead and pulled this number. The number of jobs on pathologyoutlines.com that were pathologist related was 688, and it kind of fluctuates a little bit, up into the 700s and then down to about 680. But this gives you an idea. There's a lot of jobs out on the market and clearly not enough people to fill those positions, right? In addition, the problem is not going to go away anytime soon. This is in healthcare in all areas, from nursing to histotechs and cytotechs. There are shortages across the board. Knowing that in every avenue within healthcare, whether it's pathologists or all up and down the chain, there's not enough people to cover the work that there is. And so the environment is already quite stressful. So everywhere that you look in pathology news, we're talking about workforce shortages, and it's a real problem. So what does this have to do with that interview objective that I was talking about a second ago? Let's talk about that. We're often asked which specialties are in demand. People want to know, which specialties have the highest number of job opportunities. So I did want to share with you what we're seeing on Pathology Outlines, which gives you a decent snapshot of what the full industry is doing. Here are the top specialties today, while we keep in mind that we have shortages. So do you have an opening for one of these subspecialties, the ones that are in the top 5, like cyto and heme and GI liver? If you do, that means that you have even steeper competition. We have all these open jobs. We don't have enough people to fill them. And if you have a position open in one of those top subspecialties, you're competing very heavily. So look around you. Look around you today and recognize that the people who are around you from other labs, that's your competition. So let's just say you're in Dallas, Texas, and you're hiring someone for a cyto position. Any of the labs that are within like a 50-mile radius and they have openings, people are going to be interviewing for your laboratory, and they're going to be interviewing at these other locations. How are you going to stand out? And it's important to stand out. So let's talk about that. Knowing all the stress and all the workforce shortages that we're experiencing, I think right now the best thing for you to do is establish and execute an interview process that, number one, puts all parties at ease. You need for the people within your own workplace to feel at ease. And then you also need the job candidate to come in and feel at ease, because the stress is already so high. I don't think you're going to have a good recipe for success if everyone goes into this feeling stressed out. I think you're going to have trouble hiring people. In addition, it's really important for us to remember who you're hiring. Right? Of all the generations, Millennials and Gen Z are the most interested in investing in their mental health, and they want a better balance between home and work life. So when you're hiring, if you post a position, these are important things for you to think about. How can you help them invest in their mental health? How can you help them have a better balance between work and home life? When you talk about the job, are you talking about all the benefits that come with it that are maybe unique to your particular workplace? Then let's talk about Gen X, right? Gen X generation is really interesting right now, actually, because you do have the baby boomers that are, some of them are still, working, and a lot of them are retiring, but they're on the older end of the age spectrum within your workplace. And then you have then you have Gen X that comes in right after them. And they're kind of held right between these outgoing boomers and these incoming millennials and Gen Zers. Gen X is really unique because they understand the challenges that millennials face, and they don't really judge them for it. They're like, I get it, I understand it, I know how these people work and think, and it's not a big deal. They also have a strong work ethic, which is very reflective of the generation before them too. A strong work ethic is really important. If we're going to categorize people, we're going to say that Gen X really cares about having a strong work ethic. But at the same time, they also value a work-life balance. So you can see they kind of reflect some things from the generation that went before them and the generations that are coming up after them. What's also really cool about Gen X is that they also embrace technology, much like the millennials who are coming after them. But they can understand the old ways too. So when you think about job interviews and who you're going to put in front of the people that you're potentially trying to hire, Gen X can be a really great bridge between the baby boomers and millennials. They can talk about technology. They can identify, ways that the younger generations can help maybe your firm or your lab to adopt technology in a better way. So really, no matter what's happening with the market, it's always true that the best interviews are the ones that make both parties feel comfortable and at ease. I've heard Rich Cornell say this so many times. Making people feel comfortable is going to lead to a better outcome in the interviewing process. So, considering burnout, considering that the market is very candidate driven right now, it's even more important to put people at ease during the interview. So how do we create this kind of environment? And that's something for us to really think about. It begs a different question for another time. Maybe you need to consider a culture change. But for today, we're going to talk more just about these objectives. So we already said that regarding your interview objective, you need to establish and execute an interview process that puts all parties at ease, but you also need to maintain positive momentum. How are we going to do that? Number one, I would say that time kills deals. And we've seen this happen so many times at Sante Consulting. We work really hard to ensure that our clients don't let this happen. If you wait too long during the interview process, these people are out and interviewing with other companies day in and day out. So if you take too long in your process because you don't have your ducks in a row, that just means that the longer you let them kind of hang out there and not know if you're going to give them an offer or what the offer looks like, the more opportunity they have to interview at other places and move on from you. Don't let too much time lapse. And here's how you maintain that good momentum. Okay, so doing these 4 things makes a huge difference. If these things are not ready, that's where time can really slip through the cracks. Next thing you know it, you're like a couple of weeks out. You've had the interview, you're a couple of weeks away, and you haven't even completed everything and gotten the offer over to them. So before you even post your position, please meet with your legal team, update your employment agreement, get the term sheet ready, and write out the timeline for this job interview process so you understand all the things that can happen. And when that job candidate walks away, the one that you really want, you can say, hey, you can expect to see an offer from us tomorrow, or we'll be in touch in the next 3 days, whatever it is. Know what your timeline is. And I also highly recommend this. It's so important to have everyone who's going to be interviewing the job candidate in a room for a meeting. It doesn't have to be a 3-hour meeting. I always recommend having somebody in HR or somebody within your practice that's an administrator to lead this planning meeting. This is just a really efficient way for everyone to get on the same page. Here's your team. What's everyone's role? Get answers for common questions that maybe you haven't thought about in a while. Maybe there's been some changes within your lab, but everyone needs to be on the same page as to what the questions are. And then establish lanes. It's important for everyone to know this is my role and here's my lane. I'm not going to worry about X or Y because the other people on my team are going to handle that. And the very last thing on this page, I saved this for last. I think it's really important for everyone who's going to interview someone to know how to explain and describe your culture within your workplace. Define it together. Make sure you have a very clear definition so they know how to explain it. And that way everybody's on the same page too. Now, in this market, I want to make it clear you really do not have weeks. Once you've interviewed someone, you have days. So don't let great candidates slip by because of time. Please just be ready for it. Have your interview process down to days once you've interviewed them. And keep in mind, this is really important. It's always helpful to know kind of where you stand. And so think about your job interviews when you're interviewing candidates. If you are their first interview, then you're in last place. This is actually quite true. We always recommend this to people when they're creating to create an interview schedule, but it's also something that people just like to do. When you need to warm up and just kind of get into the interview process as a candidate, You don't want to go into the job that you really want, the one that you want the most. You don't want to get into there first. You want to have a couple of rounds of kind of exercise just to make sure that you're ready to go, right? So if you are their very first interview, then just be aware that you're their warm up, and you have to do so much more to make sure that they feel comfortable, that they're very interested in your workplace, and that you create an environment that they're interested in being there. And that takes a little bit of work. So now we're really going to talk through how to speed things up. Once you've found great candidates, all of these things should be completed before the first video call, right? And that includes the offer letters. So you want to screen the candidates, you want to handle all the references and get those in, and you want to have all those offer letters ready to go. So as soon as they walk out from their live interview, if that's someone you want to hire, bam, bam, you can get that offer letter straight out to them. It keeps them from wondering where you stand. And as soon as they leave your doors, they're going to be interviewing in other places, and there's a lot of opportunities out there. So this is why I really think this is so important. So as part of your interview objective, we've said you want to put all parties at ease. You want to maintain positive momentum, which means keep things moving. And then number 3, you really want to effectively communicate your culture. Let's talk about that. Culture can be kind of an interesting thing. How do you define a culture, right? It's not necessarily something that's very intuitive for people, but I'm going to give you some ways to think about it. Think about your dress. Do you expect people to show up for work in your workplace in a suit and tie, very formal attire? Is it more of a scrubs environment? Is it business casual? When you think about how people show up and how they're dressed, that tends to provide a little bit of definition to your culture. In addition, is it kind of a collegiate environment where people socialize together? There's lots of socializing opportunities, people coming together for lunch and meals or going to happy hours. Or is it more of an isolated kind of environment? People come in, they do their jobs, they go home. Maybe it's more like fence neighbors. You see your coworkers, you don't know each other very well, and so it's not as collegiate. It's more just get in, get out, get the job done. Maybe it's really rigid and structured. At the end of the day, I would just say none of these things are good or bad. There's nothing wrong with having a very formal workplace or having an extremely casual workplace. If it works for you, it works for you. You just need to understand who you are and then be able to define it for people and explain it to people. So then once you kind of understand your culture, how do you convey that culture to the client before they get there? And I would say this, if you cannot explain and define your culture for people, then someone is going to explain and define it for you. That's usually not a good idea. It's always better for you to just be very self-aware and to be able to convey that to people. It might as well be you defining your own culture, right? Now, I have a story for you. This is a horror story. We actually had a job candidate who had an interview in the Bible Belt. It was in this job interview at this particular lab setting. It's a really great group of people. If this candidate shows up and starts to notice that these people in this interview, they all have crosses on their lapels, and they notice that they open every meeting with prayer. So I get a call, where our firm gets a call later on during kind of like in the middle of the interview process, and this candidate says to the people at our firm, I'm not a good fit for this location. I'm in the middle of the interviews. I'm not going to be at dinner, and I'm coming home. And we said, oh my goodness, what has happened? And this person said, I'm Jewish. And it's very clear to me that these people are Christians, and they wear crosses on their lapels and they pray before meetings. And those are all really great things. I have no problem with it, but I'm not going to be a good fit because I am Jewish, and we're, that's not going to be a good culture fit. Now, It would have been really, really great if this client had communicated very clearly to us as a firm, the recruiting firm, like, hey, this is what our culture is all about. That way, we could have saved that candidate some time and some heartache, and we could have saved this client from spending all this time on a candidate that's not going to be a good fit. From our perspective, ooh, if we'd only known, that was a little bit of a horror story. Poor guy, and this poor group of people. Um, Communicating the culture beforehand, saying things like, hey, lose the tie, or we pray a lot and we're a Christian community. It's really just very helpful. Now, I also wanted to say that it's going to set you apart, especially in a market like today, if you are going to do some personal touches. Kind of go the extra mile. Having the head of your group do things like sending their mobile number to the job candidate before they arrive, sending them text messages on their travel day, like, hey, I'm really looking forward to seeing you. I hope you have a nice flight. These things sound small, or they might even sound like, hey, I've got too much to do. I don't have time for things like that. They actually make a really big difference in making people feel very welcome and respected. So I always recommend that employers do things like that. So that would be number 4. Let's establish and execute an interview process that puts parties at ease, maintains positive momentum, communicates your culture. And then number 4, let's close that deal very quickly, right? And here's what I mean by that. People do not close on job candidates. They do not close the deal fast enough all the time. I think it's really important at the end of the day for us to understand the job candidate's timeline. So from a recruiter perspective, we always get the lay of the land from the candidates on behalf of our clients before we go through the process, right? It's really important to know, like, hey, are you going to interview at 10 places? Do you want to get this done in 3 weeks? Like, what's your timeline? And then once we understand the candidate's timeline, we can communicate that to the client. So everybody understands, here's when you're going to hear from me, here's when you're not. Recently, we had a candidate interview in a very corporate environment, right? So when we were just talking about culture, I would say this is a very formal type of culture. And both parties wanted it to happen. The candidate wanted to work there. They loved the culture. And the employer really wanted to hire this job candidate. But the process took 2 weeks to get to the term sheet, right? So, and then it was another 2 weeks to get the contract over to the candidate. The candidate was out on the market for a total of 4 weeks because each part took 2 weeks. So you can imagine what they were doing. They were interviewing the whole time. And so the hiring entity couldn't get their act together, and somebody else ended up hiring the candidate. When in the beginning, it would have saved a lot of time and heartache because both parties knew they wanted to work together. So at the end of the day, please close quickly. Have your ducks in a row so you don't run into situations like that. If you do have your act together and you can execute your plan after the interview, you're going to be ahead of the game and you're going to be the stiffest competition out there. So otherwise, if you don't, this market is going to eat your lunch. And we don't want that for you. We want you to have a very successful interview process. So that's it right now for our clients, but what I would really like to do is now transition over to job candidates. So if you are out there looking for jobs right now, or you're about to put yourself on the market, I have a few things that hopefully are going to be really helpful tips for your next search. Now, if we have clients in the audience, which I know we do, please don't tune out right now. I think it's really helpful for you to hear things that we recommend for candidates as well. This might even be a way for you to think about what are some of the things you're looking for in job candidates, some of the signs to look for if they're very interested, etc. So I think it's really important for any job candidate, when you are looking for jobs, to get solid coaching. And there are a lot of resources out there. There's recruiters. There are a lot of recruiters. Recruiters are a great resource. Hopefully the recruiter that you work with has been doing it for a number of years and they really understand the industry. YouTube is also a really great resource. There are so many ways to use YouTube to get tips for interviewing, for preparing your CV, for finding resources and getting prepared. Because at the end of the day, here's the deal. You don't interview for jobs your whole life. It's like riding a bike. We get really rusty doing things that we don't do every day. So the first thing first, you really want to find solid coaching so that when you hop back on that bike, it's like, oh yeah, I know how to do this. I've got my tools. I can feel confident. And then, oh, this is so important. I have a horror story for you. I want to make sure that you know when your first interaction actually starts, right? So a lot of people think I get to the job interview and I sit in the room and I'm waiting for the person who's going to interview me, and that's your first interaction. That is not your first interaction. And let me share a story with you. There was a job candidate that we sent, out for a job interview, and they had to hop on an airplane. Fortunately, the candidate was really prepared, right? They ended up sitting next to the CEO of the employer on the airplane, right? So it was just kind of small talk like, hey, what are you here for? Blah, 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 blah. Next thing you know, the CEO of the company where you're interviewing is right next to you. So good thing this person was prepared and recognized, like, no matter who I'm sitting next to, they could be affiliated with the place where I want to get hired. In any community, hospitals are the largest employers, or at least in the top 5. You never know who you're sitting next to on the airplane. Now, I do have, this is the horror story I was going to get at. That was a situation where somebody was very well prepared, and we couldn't have been more proud or excited for them. But we actually had, this was in the past couple of years, we had an interview where a job candidate traveled to the job interview, walked into the building, and there was an administrative assistant or an executive administrator who was responsible for making sure that they got from A to B throughout the process. And this person did really well in the interviews, like really, really made it memorable for the people who were interviewing him. They wanted to hire him. They were going to start getting the paperwork ready, but the administrative person said, hey, I just wanted you to know that I was responsible for being with them all day and getting them from A to B. And they were extremely rude to me and disrespectful. And it doesn't make me feel very, cared for, so I just want you to know, like, well, you feel like you had a great experience. Mine with that person was really bad. And you know what? They said, that's not cool. We're not going to hire that person. So I just want you to, we can be really stressed. Interviews are very stressful, but it's never cool to kind of lose it with the people who are all the way throughout the process. It's not just about the person who's in the room who makes the hiring decision. It's also about the people who will be surrounding you and be your coworkers. Yeah, please don't do that. It was awful. And I also want to say this, when you are going into a job interview, it is your job to observe very carefully. Make sure that you're observing the culture. Um, if there's something, something that you notice, like, hey, everybody's wearing a suit and tie. I'm here wearing a suit and tie because I'm interviewing, but that's what they're wearing on a regular day. That's something for you to ask about. Notice how people treat each other. If you're very formal and you really like a formal environment, but everybody's pretty laid back and they're dressed very casually, while you like the formal dress and you like to not have a lot of personal interaction with people outside of work, then you really need to observe the culture and understand if this is going to be a good place for you or not. So you were putting them in the hot seat just as much as they are putting you in the hot seat. We're there to observe. And then also really just be careful to watch the interactions that people have together. Are they kind to each other? Are they respectful to each other? Do those things matter to you? And if so, that's part of why you're there, is to see things in person and understand if it's going to be a nice, good fit for you in the long term. This is why we always say that it's essential to be in person, to do job interviews in person, in addition to, maybe a Zoom call in the beginning. There are things that you cannot see on a Zoom call, and when you're in person, it is your responsibility to make sure you're seeing those things and deciding for yourself if it's going to be a fit or not. And then I have one last horror story. It's so important. A lot of times when you're going to a live job interview, they're going to take you out to lunch, they're going to take you out to a meal, there might be a happy hour. Please stay sober. We just had a situation in the past year where a job candidate, did really well, was interviewing really great, and then it was time to go out to dinner, and one of their potential future coworkers was there and they brought their spouse. And this particular job candidate had a few too many glasses of wine and ended up making a pass at the potential future coworker's wife. Very inappropriate. Obviously did not go over very well with the spouse who was already working with the employer. It was terrible. So then we get the phone call, hey, this went really well until we had him at dinner and he hit on so and so's wife. So obviously this isn't going to go through and you need to be aware. Man, it is not the place in a job interview to go out and have extra glasses of wine or whatever. It's you are interviewing, they are interviewing you. You need to be sober and be able to make observances and observations about the people and things around you. And they need to be able to do that for you. So don't be that guy. So I just threw this in there for fun because can you imagine what they said about that guy the next day? Like, they called us and told us what had happened, but what were they saying behind his back? Like, hey, thanks for the interview. We'll be in touch. I don't want that to be you. You don't want that to be you. This doesn't have to be your story. There's ways that you can prepare and be ready for an interview and just nail it and be really confident walking away like Leo, right? So this is all that we have for you today. I hope that whether you're a job candidate or you're an employer and you're preparing for your interviews, that this is helpful um, and provides you with just some easy tools to make sure that you're ready for that interview and that you can really succeed in this crazy marketplace. If you're interested in connecting, we are on social media. We have a YouTube channel with some really helpful resources. We have a presence on LinkedIn and X, and we also have our website, santellc.com. We love to connect. If you have questions, we're just happy to talk about, pathology, the job market, recruiting, job searching in general. It's a joy for us. And we really hope that you thrive in your next interview situation. Have a great day.